Hey guys, tonight we're going back in time, way back, to an era of castles, cloisters, and curious beauty habits. Imagine this. You're standing in a smoky great hall lit by tallow candles. The stone walls are drafty, your wool tunic is itchy, and the only mirror you've ever seen is a polished slab of metal that makes you look more like a damp goblin than a dashing courtier. And yet, you care about how you look. You worry about your skin, your teeth, maybe the shine of your boots if you're lucky enough to own a pair. Welcome to the world of medieval beauty standards, where no one's washing their hair often, but somehow you're still expected to have skin like alabaster and breath like crushed violets. And spoiler, you probably won't survive this beauty regime with your health fully intact. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from a cozy corner of the world, let me know where you are and what time it is. I love seeing where these sleepy stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge into a medieval village, and the first thing you notice, besides the smell of wood smoke and livestock, is that beauty is a quiet background obsession. Not loud, not neon lipstick obvious, but woven into daily life like the scent of lavender tucked in a linen chest. People care how they look. Not because of social media, of course, but because appearances meant status, piety, virtue, and let's be real, potential marriageability. But let's start at the top, mirrors. Or rather, the lack of them. Most people in medieval Europe never saw their full reflection. Mirrors were luxury items, often owned by the wealthy and the clergy. They were small, made of polished metal or early blown glass, and distorted your face just enough to make your self-confidence wobble. Imagine using a scratched spoon as your makeup mirror. That's your daily vibe. Still, people found ways to scrutinize themselves. They looked at puddles, burnished shields, even polished bowls. Vanity found a way. One noblewoman in 13th century France was famously mocked for staring into a mirror so long that she forgot her prayers. That story was used as a warning against pride, but secretly, everyone at the time was thinking, where did she get a mirror? Men were just as guilty of this low-key vanity. A young squire might spend an absurd amount of time adjusting his belt to just the right hip angle, letting his hose cling snugly to his calves. Because hose weren't just tights, they were a declaration. And if you think no one was peeking, you'd be wrong. Courtly love poems of the era don't just describe ladies' long fingers. They go all in on calves, shoulders, and the sheen of skin glimpsed beneath fine linen. Now, let's be clear. The ideal medieval beauty looked very different from ours. Thin eyebrows? Check. Pale skin? Absolutely. Chiseled jawlines or gym-toned bodies? Not really a thing. In fact, being a bit plump was desirable. It meant you had food. A flushed, ruddy face implied vitality, but only to a point. Too much sun? You looked like a peasant. Too gaunt? You looked like a monk. Balance was everything. Speaking of monks, they had their own standards. Tonsured heads, those shaved crowns with a ring of hair, were meant to humble the wearer before God. But did it secretly serve as a medieval hair trend? Historians still argue whether the tonsure was purely spiritual or just a great excuse to avoid lice. Either way, it became a defining look. And that brings us to the idea of beauty and morality. These two were deeply linked. A beautiful woman was considered dangerous. Unless she was modest, pale, and deeply pious. Think hot nun energy. Beauty could be evidence of divine favor or of witchcraft. You never quite knew which. Fringe scholars even speculate that some women feigned illness to appear more delicate. Coughing daintily into a sleeve wasn't just for drama, it was part of a flirtation ritual. And no, this wasn't some Tumblr fanfic. In courtly literature, being languid was straight up desirable. A healthy blush was fine. A consumptive pallor? Now that was chic. And let's not forget the children. Elite boys and girls were trained early to carry themselves with grace, avoid rough play, and learn posture from watching swans glide across ponds. Okay, Maybe not the swan part, but posture really did matter. Hunched backs were associated with sin and moral failure. So yes, even in an age of plagues and pigs wandering through streets, someone was worrying about their spine alignment. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. Some aristocratic ladies refused to eat garlic or onions, not just to avoid bad breath, but because they believed those foods made their skin coarse. Instead, they ate almonds, dates, and sugar when they could get it. The medieval version of a wellness smoothie, I guess. Meanwhile, you, the average peasant, were probably just trying to keep the mud off your face. But that didn't mean you didn't care. You might keep a small comb tucked in your sash. Maybe you washed your face in milk once a month, if you were feeling fancy. And if there was a festival coming up, you might even use animal fat to slick back your hair. Beauty in this world was something you earned, slowly, and not without risk. Mercury was in some cosmetics. Lead too. Your favorite skin cream might make you glow, then kill you softly. But what's a little poisoning in the name of love? And yet, despite all this effort, no one was ever quite sure what beautiful meant. Was it holiness, fertility, clean fingernails, a silky voice? The answer shifted with region, religion, and decade. And so, in this candlelit world of quiet striving, your beauty matters, but only if it doesn't look like you're trying too hard. Vanity is a sin, but effort is expected. You walk that delicate line, barefoot and blushing, hoping the local baker notices your clean veil and subtle rosewater rinse. Tomorrow, you'll worry about eyebrows. Tonight, you dream of someone telling you that you glow like a saint. You wake to the sound of church bells tolling across a gray sky. Morning in your medieval village doesn't begin with an alarm clock, but with the echo of metal on metal and the lowing of restless cows. As you wash your face with cold well water, because, yes, even peasants did that when they could, you glance into a bucket's surface. Your reflection ripples. Pale, or at least, pale-ish. Because here's the deal, pale skin is everything. If you're dreaming of climbing the medieval beauty ladder, your complexion needs to look like it's never seen the sun, touched the soil, or even thought about physical labor. Skin like milk, or better yet, fresh snow. Why? Because pale skin meant you were wealthy enough to stay indoors, shielded from the sun. It whispered luxury, leisure. You weren't hauling firewood or tending sheep. You were reading psalms and eating pears under a shady fig tree. Well, probably not figs if you're in England, but you get the point. The beauty ideal, especially for women, was a complexion so light it veered into the ethereal. Rosy cheeks were allowed, sure, but only a whisper of color, like a blush from reading poetry, not a sprint up a muddy hillside. The lips? Crimson, like crushed berries or spilled wine, whichever metaphor you prefer. Combine that with hair tucked neatly beneath a veil, and you were aiming for that elusive combo of fragile, holy, and slightly untouchable. And how did people achieve this look? With ingredients that would make your modern dermatologist faint. Take ceruse, a white lead-based face paint that was used well into the Renaissance but had earlier medieval predecessors too. Smoothed over the skin, it created that desired porcelain effect, but at a cost. Lead poisoning. Your skin might look flawless now, but in 5 years you'd be losing teeth, developing tremors, or, in one case, literally shedding your skin like an old scroll. Another fan favorite, vinegar-soaked cloths placed over the face to bleach the skin, or masks made of egg whites and ground-up lily roots, left to dry until your face tightened like a drum. There was even a rumored elixir in certain apothecary manuals involving, brace yourself, white lead mixed with rose water and animal fat. Smooth and fragrant, also deadly. And it wasn't just women. Some men of the upper classes took part in this too. The courts of Europe, especially in France and Italy, saw men powder their faces lightly to maintain that noble, refined air. Not to look feminine, no, that was dangerous territory, but to look elevated. Removed from the peasantry. Imagine a knight who just returned from crusading dabbing his cheeks with a rice powder puff. It happened. Occasionally. Quietly. Now here's a debate that still stirs among historians. Did peasants actually aspire to look like nobles, or did they have their own separate beauty standards altogether? Some argue that poor women used local herbs and traditions, embracing sun-darkened skin as a mark of endurance. Others say that even the poorest villagers still chased the same ideals, mimicking courtly trends with what they had. Chalk dust for pale skin, crushed berries for blush, and sheep grease to lock it all in. Not exactly a Sephora starter kit, but hey, it worked. For your lips, those should be red. Not clown red, but a natural flush. Think bitten by a chilly wind, rather than dipped in beet juice. And yes, beetroot was, in fact, used for this. So was cochineal, a brilliant red dye derived from insects, when it could be traded or smuggled in from southern regions. You'd press it onto your lips with a cloth and hope no one caught you mid-routine. And while we're talking pigments, here's your fringe fact of the night. Some medieval cosmetic recipes recommended, wait for it, crushed pearls. Yes, pearls. Ground into powder, mixed with honey or cream, and applied to the face as a brightening agent. Did it work? Who knows? Was it wildly expensive? Absolutely. Did it scream, "Look at me, I am too delicate to plow a field"? Bingo. Then there's the drama of freckles. Today, they're adorable. Back then, not so much. Freckles were seen as blemishes, disruptions in the smooth perfection of pale skin. Some herbal manuals recommended rubbing parsley juice on your face to fade them. Others went darker, literally. There are records of women using ash paste to balance their freckles with the rest of their skin. The result was murky. And while face creams were usually handmade, occasionally monks or nuns dabbled in beauty recipes too. Yes, the same folks copying psalms also recorded remedies for livid complexions and cheeks grown dull from age. Historians still argue whether these recipes were meant for pious use, healing, or whether some of the cloistered were sneakily keeping up appearances. There's even a legend of one nun who secretly made rose petal salves and sent them to a noblewoman in exchange for books. So here you are, sitting at your rustic wooden table, dabbing a mixture of crushed lily bulbs and goat's milk onto your cheeks while your younger cousin braids her hair by the hearth. She asks if her lips look red enough. You tell her she should chew on a raspberry twig, very gently, for just a hint of color. It's an old trick. Later, you might pass a market stall selling medicinal herbs. If you have a spare coin, you pick up some dried rosemary to boil with rainwater and rinse your face at night. Someone once told you it tightens the skin. You have no idea if it's true, but it sounds fancy. What no one talks about aloud, of course, is that beauty is also survival. If you're a young woman, looking delicate could mean a better match, a lighter dowry, maybe a husband with all his teeth. If you're a man, a fresh face and neat grooming might land you a place as a squire, or even better, clerk to a merchant. Even the church, which constantly preached against vanity, couldn't quite squash the beauty game. Priests gave sermons on the dangers of pride and painted moral tales of maidens too obsessed with their looks. But in those same towns, women bought new ribbons, and men sharpened their razors before a feast day. Because at the end of the day, beauty in medieval times wasn't about seduction. It wasn't about rebellion. It was about presence. Looking your best was a small rebellion against mud, labor, and plague. A declaration of humanity, even when your castle didn't have a bath and your shoes were made of felted wool. You glance into your metal mirror one more time. Your lips are a little darker now, your skin dusted with crushed eggshell. You feel almost luminous. And the chickens outside? Well, they're not impressed. But maybe that baker's son will be. The sun's just high enough to cast long, drowsy shadows across the thatched rooftops. And you, naturally, are thinking about hair. Not just any hair, golden hair. The kind poets describe as sunlight trapped in silk, or a divine crown of flaxen fire. Whether you're strolling through a noble courtyard or tending herbs behind your cottage, the golden-haired ideal is everywhere. In medieval Europe, especially from the 12th century onward, being blonde wasn't just pretty, it was practically holy. Blondes were painted as pure, virtuous, and angelic. Artists depicted the Virgin Mary with flowing pale locks, despite the obvious geographical inaccuracy. Blame it on symbolism. Light hair meant lightness of spirit. And who wouldn't want that kind of marketing? But if you weren't born with naturally fair hair, no problem. Medieval folks had a fix. Lemon juice, saffron, and hours in the sun. Yes, lemon juice. Mixed with crushed calendula petals or white wine, it was applied like a leave-in conditioner from the underworld. You'd sit beneath the scorching sky with your hair plastered down, praying for a chemical miracle. And then wait. And wait. Eventually your hair lightened, unless it burned to straw first. You might also turn to lye-based rinses, or even urine, human urine, aged in a jug for several days. The ammonia helped bleach the strands, and yes, it smelled exactly as you're imagining. Historians still argue whether these recipes were common knowledge or passed down through elite circles like clandestine family secrets. Either way, desperation made for inventive beauty hacks. Now, not everyone wanted to be blonde. In Italy, dark hair had its moment, especially among aristocrats who saw raven tresses as sultry and noble. But across much of northern and western Europe, blonde equaled beauty. Brunettes were the seductive temptresses. Blondes were the maidens worth rescuing from towers. It's no wonder people went to wild lengths to reach the golden ideal. Men, too, weren't immune. A young knight with sun-kissed hair was seen as virile and gallant. Even Charlemagne was rumored to have light hair, and that detail was emphasized in court accounts. Not because it mattered politically, but because it sounded dreamy. But it wasn't just color that mattered. Hair texture, length, and style played major roles in the medieval beauty game. Long, loose hair, that was youthful and alluring, but only for unmarried girls. Once you were wed, hair was hidden beneath layers, a wimple, a veil, sometimes even a stiff linen headdress that looked like something between a lampshade and a bishop's mitre. Sexy, no? These head coverings weren't just modesty markers, they were signals. An elaborate veil with embroidery? You're wealthy. A tight woolen coif? Probably a working woman. No head covering at all in church? Prepare for judgment. There are records of women being fined or shamed for appearing bareheaded during Mass. It was seen as scandalous, like wearing pajama pants to a wedding, but worse. Then there's the brow game, specifically not having one. High foreheads were a huge deal. The bigger the forehead, the more refined you looked. The reasoning? A smooth, open brow was seen as a sign of intelligence, nobility, and elegance. And so, out came the tweezers, the pumice stones, and even shell razors. Women plucked or shaved their eyebrows and hairlines to push their foreheads as far back as possible. Some even singed them off using hot knives or caustic herbs. You might wake up, boil your water, and then gently scrape away the fine hairs above your temples to elevate your whole face. And if that sounds horrifying, remember, the fashion of the time also included shoes shaped like duckbills and sleeves long enough to trip over. This was not a practical age. If you're a man, you'd likely keep your hair shoulder length or slightly shorter, depending on your status. Priests cropped their hair. Knights sometimes wore it longer to show off after battle. The church occasionally grumbled about foppish men spending too much time grooming, but let's be honest, everyone was doing it. And here's a ringed tidbit for your medieval dream journal. Some women believed that sleeping with rosemary tucked in their pillows would make their hair grow longer and glossier. Others rubbed crushed ivy or nettle leaves into their scalp. Did it work? Probably not. But the dedication was real. In some parts of Europe, particularly among Celtic or Norse-influenced regions, braids were more than just pretty. They were symbolic, of tribe, of status, even of marriage. Intricate plaits, often looped and pinned beneath veils, showed both creativity and skill. If your hair looked like a woven tapestry, people noticed. Of course, there were downsides to all this effort. Lice were everywhere. Hair washing happened rarely, maybe once a week at best. And while people did use soaps made from ash and animal fat, they could be harsh on the scalp. Some folks countered this with herbal rinses, lavender, rosemary, sage, or even beer. Yes, beer. Applied warm, it gave shine, and a slight scent of tavern. Let's not forget wigs either. While not as common as in later centuries, hairpieces did exist. Some noble women kept locks of other people's hair, usually from servants or even children, to blend into their own. These extensions were stitched, pinned, or braided into existing hair. The effect? A fuller, lusher cascade of golden waves ready for courtly admiration. But not everyone admired these looks. Some clerics wrote stern letters warning women not to arouse sin through fancy hairstyles. In one 14th century text, a monk lamented that the devil nesteth in curled locks and oiled beards, strong words for what was essentially medieval dry shampoo. Still, you spend an hour each day tending to your hair. You part it carefully with a bone comb, twisting it into loops at the side of your head. You pat on a mixture of honey and vinegar, hoping for shine. Maybe you hum a little song your mother taught to you about how fair hair wins fair hearts. As you head outside, the wind lifts a few strands from beneath your veil. A passing farmer glances up. For a moment, the whole world feels like a page from a troubadour song. Or at least it would, if your scalp weren't mildly burning from yesterday's urine rinse. Beauty hurts, even in a century with no selfies. You tilt your head toward the candlelight, inspecting your reflection in a piece of polished brass. Not for your skin this time, or the curve of your lips. No, you're checking something far more important in this moment. The shape of your forehead, and the total, glorious absence of eyebrows. Yes, that's right. In much of medieval Europe, particularly among the noble classes, a high, bare forehead wasn't just admired, it was revered. The higher the better. If your hairline started somewhere around the middle of your scalp, you were halfway to beauty sainthood. And so begins the daily ritual of forehead grooming. You sit by the fire, a linen cloth over your lap, and begin tweezing. Slowly, painfully, hair by hair. First the brows, then the edges of the hairline, creeping upward like a landscape being cleared for holy construction. Some women used rough stones to buff the fine baby hairs into oblivion. Others applied potions made with vinegar and walnut oil to thin the follicles. Why the obsession? It's hard to say exactly. Some historians link it to the church's influence, an effort to draw attention away from sensual features toward a nobler expression. Others think it was simply fashion, a chain reaction from court to court, like bangs in the 1980s. One bold duchess rocks the receding look, and suddenly half the kingdom is shaving their temples. And those eyebrows, totally optional. In some periods, thin brows were acceptable, just faint strokes above the eyes, barely visible, but in others, having no brows at all was ideal, a smooth canvas, blank and neon. Oval. The more your face resembled an ivory statue of the Virgin Mary, the more likely someone might write you into a chivalric poem. Now, if you're picturing all this as strictly feminine business, think again. Men too dabbled in forehead enhancement, especially scholars, clerics, and the nobility. Not necessarily through hair removal, but through hairstyling that emphasized the brow. Pulled back hair, center parts. Even the tonsure, remember that holy donut of scalp, gave the forehead pride of place. Let's not skip the wigs and hats either. Fashion worked hard to showcase that prime forehead real estate. Hennons, the cone-like headdresses worn by noble women, rose high above the head and swept the eye upward. Some even had translucent veils that fluttered like banners of beauty behind the wearer. Wearing a hennon without a properly shaved forehead? Social suicide. There's a record of one French noblewoman being laughed out of a banquet because her hairline hadn't been properly groomed beneath her elaborate headpiece. She left crying. Her forehead probably remained fabulous, though. Now, here's a fringe fact for your sleepy mind. In parts of 14th century Italy, women used crushed ants to rub on their brows and hairline. Why? The acidic content supposedly burned away fine hairs and prevented regrowth. Yes, ants. We do not recommend this as a modern skincare routine, though we admire the commitment. The average peasant woman may not have had the time or patience for this kind of hairline maintenance, but even in rural areas, plucked brows and smoothed foreheads were admired. If you were getting married or attending a festival, you'd borrow a friend's tweezers, usually iron, sometimes bone, sit in a patch of sunlight, and go to work. You might even hum a song while you plucked, to distract from the stinging. Of course, the fashion wasn't without its critics. Some clergy denounced these practices as vanities of the flesh, warning that plucking one's brow could invite demons through the forehead. Creative theology. And yet the warnings didn't stop anyone. A popular satirical poem from the 13th century mocks a woman who spends more time plucking her brow than praying, but also describes her as the belle of the town. And it wasn't just the face. Let's not forget the ears. Delicate, graceful ears were part of the ideal too. Hair was styled away from them on purpose. In some German courts, women powdered their ears with a soft chalk paste to make them look smaller and more delicate. And if your ears stuck out, a thin strip of linen, carefully tied beneath the hair, could pin them back. Early medieval ear tape. No joke. So now it's evening. You've spent the day cooking barley porridge, mending stockings and hauling water, but you still find time to sit by the hearth and give your forehead a gentle polish with a cloth soaked in rose water. Your niece is watching, curious. You show her how to hold the tweezers and pull quickly. She yelps. You both laugh. Beauty is passed down like bread recipes, quietly, with a little pain and a lot of commentary. Men around you notice, even if they don't say it. A clerk in the market glances up longer than necessary when he sees your smooth brow beneath your veil. He probably won't write a poem about you, but he might remember your face when he's bored copying tax rolls tomorrow. And here's something else to tuck into your brain before sleep. In some illuminated manuscripts, angels are depicted with huge, radiant foreheads and no brows. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe the medieval idea of divine beauty was suspiciously similar to that of courtly fashion. In the glow of candlelight, you catch your reflection again, a soft forehead, free of lines, gleaming ever so faintly. No lashes, no brows. You look like a statue, a saint, or maybe just a very determined villager with a pair of iron tweezers and a dream. Tomorrow, you'll worry about your breath. Tonight, the veil slips over your brow, and you drift off with the quiet pride of a job well tweezed. You wake to the scent of boiling herbs and the faintly sour tang of something fermenting in the kitchen. Before the day has truly begun, before even the chickens have flapped off their roosts, you're already thinking, does my breath smell like cabbage again? Because yes, even in a world with no TikTok hacks or mint-flavored floss, medieval folks cared about teeth, breath, and the delicate matter of scent. Maybe not in the way we do now, with our whitening strips and electric toothbrushes, but in their own way, they tried, and sometimes they succeeded. You start your morning with a rinse, not with mouthwash, of course, but with a homemade concoction of warm wine infused with cloves, mint leaves, and maybe a little sage if you had any left over from last week's stew. Swish, spit, repeat. There's something comforting about the ritual, even if you still taste a hint of garlic from yesterday's dinner. Medieval oral hygiene wasn't completely non-existent, it just looked a little different. Toothpicks were everywhere. Made of wood, bone, or metal, they were considered essential items and often came with ornate handles. Nobles might carry them on chains like charms. Some even dipped them in rose oil or vinegar to make them antiseptic and fragrant. To clean teeth, people used chew sticks, twigs from aromatic trees like hazel or juniper. You'd fray one end by chewing and then rub it across your teeth like a fuzzy little brush. Some folks used crushed charcoal or ground salt mixed with herbs as a scrub. The taste? Abrasive. The effect? Surprisingly decent if you didn't. To mind losing enamel along the way? Now, let's talk about the actual state of medieval teeth. You might be surprised to learn that, for the average peasant, dental decay wasn't as bad as in later centuries. Why? Because sugar wasn't widely available, at least not in the quantities it would be by the 17th and 18th centuries. Most people ate coarse bread, vegetables, and broth. Not exactly a dentist's nightmare. That said, toothaches happened. A lot. You'd hear about someone in the village having their molar pulled with iron tongs, no anesthetic, and a good dose of mead beforehand. The local barber surgeon would perform the job in a matter of minutes, quick, brutal, and probably not too clean. And if your teeth fell out naturally, so be it. A gummy smile didn't stop you from getting married, as long as your breath wasn't horrifying. Which brings us back to scent. Because breath wasn't the only thing people noticed. Body odor was a whole aesthetic issue. And with bathing being infrequent for most folks, we'll get to that in more detail later, people turned to more creative methods. You might rub your armpits with rosemary or rose petals. Some even dabbed behind their ears with vinegar or pressed lavender into their clothes. A particularly dedicated noblewoman in 14th century Spain was known for storing her dresses in chests filled with dried herbs and perfumed wool. When she walked, a cloud of garden scent followed her, like a medieval air freshener on legs. And let's not pretend perfume was a modern invention. People used scented oils, powders, and even incense as part of their hygiene. Frankincense and myrrh weren't just biblical gifts, they were burned in rooms to mask the scent of unwashed humans. In wealthier households, sweet bags, filled with herbs like clove and marjoram, were tied to belts or worn inside bodices. One account even mentions a lord who stuffed his shoes with mint leaves to calm his humors. But the teeth, the teeth. That's what really sticks with you. The knowledge that despite the crude tools and lack of professional dentistry, people still tried to keep them clean. Even the church had something to say about oral hygiene. One 12th century monk wrote that, "A foul mouth is an offense to God's ears." That's medieval for don't skip brushing. There are, of course, some more fringe approaches. In certain Slavic villages, it was rumored that rubbing your teeth with ash from a lightning-struck tree would protect you from decay and envy. Other folk remedies involved mouse skulls, no, really, ground into powder and mixed with vinegar to treat toothaches. Historians still argue whether this was a widely believed treatment or just one of those bizarre one-off traditions recorded because someone thought it sounded impressive. And don't get us started on the breath-freshening lozenges. These were handmade from herbs, honey, and occasionally crushed pearls. Yes, pearls again. Apparently, if it sparkled, someone in the medieval world tried to eat it. So here you are, back at your tiny table, rubbing a mint leaf across your tongue while humming to yourself. Your partner walks in and raises an eyebrow. "Did you eat the candle wax again?" they ask, only half joking. "No," you say. "Just cleansing my humors." Because that's the thing. In the medieval mind, beauty and health were completely intertwined. Bad breath wasn't just a social nuisance, it meant your inner balance was off. Too much black bile, not enough choleric energy. That could manifest in your scent, your gums, your hair texture. You weren't just fighting plaque, you were fighting metaphysical imbalance. And if none of your herbal remedies worked, you could always carry a clove in your mouth during church. Not only did it smell nice, but it gave you something to focus on while pretending. Not to fall asleep during the 5th reading of the Book of Psalms. By nightfall, you've done your best. Your mouth tastes faintly of thyme, your armpits of elderflower, and your breath, well, your breath is at least not actively offensive. You slip into your straw mattress, still chewing the end of your hazel stick, wondering idly if your great-aunt's advice about sage rinse was actually rooted in science or just superstition. Probably both. You exhale slowly, the scent of mint curling into the air like a question for the stars. Tomorrow, you'll worry about beard trends. Tonight, you sleep sweetly, with reasonably pleasant breath. You wake to the sound of chickens arguing in the yard, and you stretch beneath your wool blanket, scratching absently at your chin. It's a bit bristly. You wonder, just briefly, if today's the day you trim your beard. Because if you're a man in medieval Europe, your beard isn't just hair, it's a statement. And whether you're a peasant farmer, a highborn knight, or a monk contemplating eternity in a stone cell, your facial hair is telling everyone something about who you are, whether you like it or not. In the early medieval period, beards were bold, wild even. The Anglo-Saxons favored thick, unruly growths that gave them a vaguely wizard-like appearance, equal parts noble and terrifying. Vikings, too, were all about the beard, and not just for warmth in the fjords. A well-groomed beard meant you were healthy, masculine, and probably not someone to mess with. But fashion is a fickle beast. By the high Middle Ages, especially in France and England, clean-shaven faces became the new look for men of the court. A smooth chin suggested discipline, intellect, and refinement. Knights might let a bit of stubble show, just enough to say, "I've been too busy winning battles to shave," but anything more became suspect. Which means that every morning, depending on your social rank and current political climate, you had to decide to shave or not to shave. If you were a monk or cleric, the answer was easy. Clean-shaven was the standard. The church didn't trust beards, associating them with wildness, vanity, or worse, Eastern orthodoxy. There were debates, actual theological debates, over the holiness of facial hair. Historians still argue whether these arguments were symbolic or if bishops really were out there comparing beard lengths behind the altar. And yet, even in the monastic world, exceptions crept in. Hermits and mystics often grew beards as a mark of spiritual detachment. The longer and more tangled the beard, the holier you seemed, like you'd wandered so far from vanity that even your beard had lost track of time. Now let's say you're a tradesman or merchant. For you, facial hair can be an asset. A neatly trimmed mustache paired with a pointed beard might make you look prosperous and wise. Not too flashy, though. You don't want to seem like you're putting on airs. You oil your beard with a dab of goose fat and comb it with a boar bristle brush passed down from your uncle. You're aiming for approachable authority. Nobles, on the other hand, had more flexibility. In the 14th century, short pointed beards became fashionable among the upper classes, inspired by courtly portraits and poetry. These weren't wild man beards. They were sculpted, narrow, often curled slightly at the ends. They required maintenance, time, a little vanity, which is where razors come in. Not the stainless steel miracles of today, of course. Medieval razors were simple blades, iron or bronze, honed against leather straps. Shaving was precarious. One slip and your cheek might bleed for hours. Many men opted to have barbers do it. And yes, barbers were your friendly neighborhood surgeons too. So if you had a toothache and a shaggy beard, it was a 2-for-1 deal. But what about beards as symbols of rebellion? Now we're getting somewhere. In certain periods, particularly under strict regimes or religious crackdowns, men deliberately grew beards to show independence. In parts of the Islamic world during the medieval period, a beard was a religious obligation. Cleanliness and grooming were sacred acts. In contrast, some European Christian leaders viewed long beards as suspect, foreign, or even dangerous. So in multicultural cities like Cordoba or Constantinople, your beard might mark your faith as much as your fashion sense. And then there were the beard laws. Yes, actual laws. In 12th century England, Henry II tried to enforce shaving among his knights to reflect Roman customs and royal decorum. A few decades later, King Louis IX of France reportedly imposed a beard tax on certain officials. Some historians believe this was to control vanity. Others think it was just a way to make money from fashionable nobles with strong jawlines. Here's a quirky little tidbit to keep you entertained. Some knights oiled their beards before battle, believing a glossy chin showed bravery and divine favor. One German knight, according to legend, braided his beard into the shape of a cross before duels. His enemies feared him, or at least stared long enough for him to strike first. Peasants, by contrast, didn't have the luxury of beard sculpting. Their facial hair was shaped by season, labor, and whatever blade they could sharpen on a river rock. In winter, they let it grow for warmth. In summer, maybe they trimmed it with sheep shears, carefully. A clean face on feast day was still expected, especially if you were attending church or proposing marriage. You today are somewhere in the middle. Your beard is a bit scruffy. It says, "I chop wood, but I also know poetry." You rinse it with the last of the lavender water from yesterday's wash and run your fingers through it thoughtfully. Maybe, today you'll trim it. Or maybe you'll lean into the rugged look. Outside, your neighbor, a man of 70 with a beard like a snowdrift, waves and winks. "Nice stubble," he says. "Looks like you're either falling in love or falling behind on chores." You laugh. In truth, you're just trying to look good for the feast tomorrow. Maybe you'll find some goose fat and rosemary to soften the wiry ends. Maybe you'll even sharpen your blade and risk a full shave. And if you nick your chin, well, you've got a strip of linen and a story to tell. Because in medieval times, your beard doesn't just say who you are, it says who you hope to become. Tomorrow, you'll ponder the beauty of fasting. Tonight, you stroke your chin and smile into the candlelight. The morning meal is meager, barley porridge and a few shriveled berries, but you savor each bite slowly because today's the feast day of St. Agatha, and that means fasting. Now, fasting doesn't sound like the stuff of beauty. At first blush, it conjures images of growling stomachs, wilted vegetables, and grumpy monks. But in medieval times, fasting wasn't just about pleasing the saints or atoning for sins. It was also, curiously, quietly, a beauty practice. You sip weak ale instead of water, safer and with fewer floating things, and feel your body settle into the empty hush that fasting brings. There's a lightness to it, almost like floating. And in this world of heavy wool gowns, muddy streets, and dense bread, lightness is desirable. To look frail, that was often the goal, especially if you were a woman. The ideal lady, according to courtly literature, was pale, thin, delicate. She didn't sweat, didn't stumble, and certainly didn't have meat stuck in her teeth. So how did one achieve such delicacy? With long periods of holy hunger, of course. Religious fasts were frequent, nearly half the calendar year in fact. Lent, Ember Days, Feast Eves, Saints' Days. The list went on. It just so happened that looking elegant and pious went hand in hand. For noble women, this became a fine art. There are recorded accounts of women who fasted not just as a spiritual act, but to keep their figures ethereal. One young countess was praised for surviving an entire summer on broth, soaked almonds, and virtue alone. Did she suffer? Probably. But her waist? Positively lyrical, if the poets are to be believed. Historians still argue whether these accounts are true reflections of actual behavior or idealized exaggerations. Some say women used fasting to subtly control their appearance without defying the church's rules on vanity. Others believe these tales were male fantasies, projected onto women who simply wanted to keep their food from spoiling in summer heat. Now let's not forget the men. Fasting was seen as a test of moral strength and spiritual discipline, but it also had a curious beauty payoff. Slim, sharp-jawed monks were seen as closer to the divine. Emaciation became a kind of spiritual glow. St. Francis of Assisi, according to some accounts, was practically translucent by the end of his life. He may not have cared about cheekbones, but he definitely had them. In some elite households, fasting days also doubled as beauty days. You might eat only boiled greens, drink diluted wine, and then slather your face with a mashed fig mask to draw out humors. Bathing might follow if water was heated, and your hair would be rubbed with warm oil. The whole routine felt clean, ascetic. You glowed not from sugar or cosmetics, but from discipline. And here's a curious tidbit. Fasting was sometimes used as an excuse to avoid undesirable social situations. Don't want to eat the suspicious stew served at your neighbor's house? Say you're observing the vigil of St. Eligius. Not only are you pious, you've just dodged food poisoning. Beauty and strategy in one tidy package. Of course, for peasants, fasting wasn't always volunta. Food shortages were real, winters were long, harvests failed. In these cases, fasting didn't beautify, it starved. But even among the poor, there was an awareness of what made a person look well kept. A face not too full, a neck not too thick, hands that looked nimble, not swollen. Hunger was survival, but also, at times, a side door into accidental elegance. There were even holy anorexics, a term scholars use for deeply religious women who fasted to the point of illness, sometimes ecstasy. Saint Catherine of Siena reportedly lived on nothing but the Eucharist for weeks at a time. Her face, they said, became ghost-like and radiant. Was it divine light or malnourishment? Hard to say. But either way, people noticed. And if you did eat during a fast, you had to be careful. No meat, obviously, no animal fats. Fish was usually allowed, though fish sometimes included animals suspiciously shaped like pigs, if you were creative enough. Beavers were once classified as fish by French clergy because they swam. The logic? If it's wet, it's holy. Welcome to the medieval menu. So here you are, nibbling a piece of flatbread and sipping thin broth. Your stomach rumbles softly, but there's something calming about the ritual. You feel lighter. Your cheeks are a bit hollow. Your hands are cool and steady. Your friend leans over and whispers, "You're glowing like a reliquary." You smile, knowing it's the lack of food, not gilded saints, making your eyes shine. Later, you'll lie down on your straw mattress, not entirely full, but strangely satisfied. Your face feels smooth, your body quiet. You run a hand over your ribs, not to count them, but to feel the space beneath your skin. You wonder if you look more holy tonight. Because in the medieval world, beauty wasn't always about adornment. It was sometimes about absence, emptiness, grace drawn from restraint. Tomorrow you'll explore makeup and scandal. Tonight you fast in silence and sleep like a saint. The morning sun creeps in like a nosy monk, soft but insistent, and you stretch beneath your coarse linen sheet, reaching for your satchel of secrets. Not gold, not relics. Something far more controversial in your little village, your makeup pouch. Now before you panic, know this. You're not alone. Despite all the warnings from the pulpit, the subtle side eyes from the priest's wife, and the looming threat of being called vain or even sinful, people in the medieval world absolutely did use makeup. It was just complicated. You begin your beauty ritual slowly, deliberately. First, a dab of white powder made from ground chalk and eggshell, applied with a scrap of fine wool. Then a touch of color, pressed into your cheeks with the edge of a damp linen rag. It smells faintly of rosewater and sheep tallow. You know it's not quite natural, but it gives you that delicate, flushed from a day of prayer look that turns heads without sounding any theological alarms. See, in theory, the church frowned on vanity, especially female vanity. The Book of Ecclesiastes isn't exactly pro-blush. The clergy warned that women who painted their faces invited lust, pride, and possibly small demons to roost in their eyelashes. But in practice, everyone kind of ignored that, at least a little, particularly on feast days, weddings, and, well, Wednesdays. Cosmetics were often coded as sinful, but only if you got caught or went too far. A hint of color that enhanced God's work? Fine. A full face of lead, coal, and beet juice? You might be asked to confess before your next communion. And here's where the beauty game becomes extra spicy. The ingredients. Medieval makeup wasn't manufactured in spotless laboratories with dermatologists nodding approvingly. No, it was cooked up in kitchens, monasteries, and apothecaries, often using ingredients that today would land on a poison control list. To whiten the skin, women used mixtures of vinegar and powdered lead, ceruse again, though milder than the Renaissance version. There were gentler options too, crushed lily root, cooked rice water, or mashed barley mixed with almond milk. These left a soft, slightly waxy finish on the skin, which, if you squinted, looked like noble pallor. For rouge, oh, the creativity was endless. Crushed strawberries, mulberries, red ochre, madder root, even pig's blood in extreme cases. Some women mixed these with animal fat to create a creamy tint. The trick was moderation. Too much, and you looked like a tavern girl. Too little, and you looked like you hadn't slept in a fortnight. To be fair, you probably hadn't. Lips, too, got a little attention. A mixture of crushed rose petals and vinegar could be dabbed on to create a soft pink stain. If you had access to cochineal, the prized insect dye, a single drop was enough to make your mouth look like a love poem. Some even used burnt almonds for a deeper tint, though that occasionally veered into the you've just eaten a crow territory. Here's a fringe tidbit for your sleepy mind. Some makeup manuals advise noblewomen to paint fake veins on their breasts and temples using blue dye to give the illusion of delicate, translucent skin. Historians still debate whether this was widespread practice or an overzealous trend among particularly imaginative aristocrats. Either way, imagine drawing on your own veins to look more fragile. Talk about commitment. And while women were the main users, men weren't completely out of the beauty loop. Some courtiers subtly powdered their faces before grand events. Others darkened their lashes with soot for dramatic effect, though this was whispered about and always explained away as for the theater or the glare of tournaments. Sure, Gregory. We believe you. Monks and clerics might condemn these practices publicly, but in their private libraries, tucked between psalters and herbals, you could find recipes. Healing salves and facial unguents, same thing, different label. It wasn't about beauty, they'd claim. It was about preserving the skin from harsh winds. Right. Then there were the books of secrets, those mysterious little volumes passed hand to hand among women and healers, filled with recipes for everything from soothing boils to making the face shine like the moon. Some included instructions for teeth whitening using sage ash and wine vinegar. Others described a cold cream made from beeswax, rosewater, and goose fat. If you're wondering, yes, it was basically medieval moisturizer. And here's the part no one likes to admit. Makeup also served strategic purposes. In arranged marriages, a woman's appearance could be the deciding factor between a good match and a lifetime of peeling potatoes in silence. Enhancing your looks, subtly or not, was a survival tool. One noblewoman reportedly carried a scented sachet laced with powdered rouge, just in case her future husband showed up early. Practical and prepared. But there was always risk. Too much effort, and you were vain. Too little, and you were neglected. Women, especially noblewomen, walked a tightrope suspended over boiling gossip and righteous sermons. And yet, you still rise each day and powder your cheeks. You still stain your lips with the last of the mulberry paste. You still rinse your face in water scented with fennel and lavender. Because you're not just painting your face, you're painting your place, in court, in church, in someone's memory. Even now, as you tie your veil and glance once more at your reflection in a pot lid, you feel that quiet, warm pride. The glow isn't from sin, it's from effort, from care. You step into the daylight, and someone low oaks at you for a moment longer than they need to. Tomorrow, you'll think about beauty and class. Tonight, your rouge-stained lips smile softly in the dark. It's a market day, and you're on your way to town, carefully stepping around muddy puddles, sheep droppings, and the occasional suspicious cabbage leaf. You've got a basket in one hand, your best shoes on, and your veil arranged just so. But even with your face powdered and your lips gently berry-stained, you can't help noticing the woman walking ahead of you. Her sleeves trail like pennants behind her, embroidered with thread that catches the light. Her shoes are stitched leather, real leather, and her wimple is so crisply starched it could probably stand upright on its own. You know, instantly and without question. She's rich. Because in the Middle Ages, beauty wasn't just a matter of personal style. It was class-coded. Everything about your appearance, from the slope of your forehead to the cleanliness of your fingernails, told the world exactly where you stood on the great ladder of medieval life. Start with mirrors. If you're poor, you might never see your reflection clearly, maybe in still water, maybe in a battered metal dish. But if you're wealthy, you have access to polished silver, glass mirrors imported from Venice, and even servants who help you check your veil for cowlicks. A noblewoman's beauty regimen might include daily facial rinses in rosewater, access to imported cosmetics, hand-mixed creams from skilled apothecaries, and tools made from ivory and silver. You, on the other hand, might be dabbing a mix of egg white and crushed parsley on your cheeks while hoping your neighbor doesn't ask to borrow your only comb again. And don't even get started on fabric. Rich fabrics could change your entire silhouette. Fine linen draped better than homespun wool. Silk sleeves shimmered and clung in ways that made even average arms seem graceful. Gold thread and embroidery literally sparkled in the sunlight. And don't think for a second those details went unnoticed. They were your calling card, your resume, and your dating profile all rolled into one. Even hair care differed wildly between classes. Wealthy folks had access to oils, herbal rinses, combs carved from bone, and yes, other people to help them use these things. If you were a noblewoman, your hair could be styled into braids so elaborate it took 2 maids and an hour of patience. If you were a peasant, you likely kept it tied back in a simple braid or scarf, washed it when the creek wasn't frozen, and hoped the pigs didn't knock your soap into the mud again. That's not to say poor women didn't care about their appearance. They did. But they played a different game, one based on practicality and regional tradition. Maybe they tucked dried herbs into their bodices to smell nice at church. Maybe they wore a faded ribbon in their hair for a spring festival. Maybe they rubbed their hands with raw onion to soften calluses, a real tip, though it left you smelling like soup. And then there's teeth. Among nobles, blackened or missing teeth were a cause for quiet panic, unless you were old enough to have earned them. Some women rinsed their mouths with sage water or chewed fennel seeds after meals. But the poor? Their teeth might actually be better, at least for a while. Less access to sugar meant fewer cavities. Of course, they also had fewer ways to treat infections when things went wrong. Now here's a little-known tidbit. In certain parts of medieval Germany, sumptuary laws dictated what colors people of different classes could wear. Blue me could be reserved for certain professions. Scarlet for nobility. Even the number of buttons on your tunic could indicate status. Imagine getting fined because your sleeves were too fancy. Fashion police, medieval edition. Men too played this game. A nobleman's tunic might be cut to emphasize the waist and shoulders. Think early medieval power suit. His hose would be dyed in expensive shades like crimson or indigo. His beard, if worn, would be neatly trimmed and oiled. In contrast, a peasant man's clothes were functional, patched, and usually smelled faintly of turnips and honest work. But it wasn't just what you wore, it was how you moved. Nobility learned to glide, literally, walking with soft steps, poised hands, and practiced expressions. Poorer folks didn't have the time or the floor space to perfect their posture. Yet there were still subtle gestures that conveyed pride and self-respect. A straight back at Mass, a clean apron on feast days, a flower tucked behind the ear. Historians still argue whether beauty ideals trickled down from the top or bubbled up from the masses. Some say the nobility set the standard: pale skin, delicate features, long limbs. Others suggest local traditions shaped their own ideals. A milkmaid might be admired for her sturdy build and sun-burnished skin, especially in regions where working women were essential to survival. What looked like beauty to a traveling troubadour might not matter one bit in a mountain village where ankles and good teeth were the real hot commodities. Then there's the idea of beauty by contrast. A lady-in-waiting with pale skin and long nails emphasized her status by not doing labor. But a village healer with calloused hands and bright eyes might be considered beautiful precisely because she radiated usefulness. Beauty wasn't just about form, it was about function. Who could bear children, keep house, cook, comfos, art, endure? And yet, everyone reached for beauty in their own way. You pass a weaver's daughter with a daisy crown in her hair. Simple, handmade, glowing. You see a merchant's wife whose gown flows like a river, her cheeks brushed with just a hint of berry. Both are beautiful. Both are trying. Because whether you lived in a crumbling cottage or a perfumed castle, the desire to be admired, to be seen, was universal. Tonight, you return home with a handful of dried rosemary and a new ribbon, secretly proud of both. You smooth your veil in the twilight, not because it's required, but because you want to look nice at supper. Tomorrow, you'll discover the ancient beauty secrets locked inside forgotten books. Tonight, you sleep with rosemary in your hair and the knowledge that, rich or poor, beauty is something you choose. The moon is still high when you rise, slipping quietly through the cold to your little chest of treasures. You lift the lid, and nestled between your spindle and a carefully folded letter from your cousin is your most prized possession, a tattered hand-bound booklet wrapped in linen. It's called The Little Book of Secrets, and no one knows you have it. These books, part recipe guide, part herbal lore, part whispered wisdom, were passed hand to hand, often between women, sometimes in monasteries, sometimes across market stalls. They carried titles like On the Care of the Body or Secrets of the Bath, and their pages held a peculiar mix of practical advice, pseudoscience, and outright magic. You turn the cracked pages slowly, breathing in the scent of dried lavender tucked between them. There, in faded ink, is your favorite, a recipe for a skin tonic said to make a woman as luminous as the blessed moon. The ingredients? Egg white, ground iris root, a pinch of salt, and the morning dew collected on St. Agnes's feast day. You haven't managed the dew yet, but the rest you've tried, did it work? Hard to say, but it made you feel lovely, and sometimes that's enough. Medieval Europe was not a place overflowing with cosmetic counters or professional dermatologists, so these books of secrets filled that void. They were a way to preserve and pass along folk wisdom, often female wisdom, in a world where women weren't always allowed to write, let alone publish. Inside these pages, you'd find treatments for freckles, almond milk and parsley, instructions for lightening hair, vinegar and saffron, of course, or bizarre advice like to whiten the face with the ashes of dove feathers. Dove feathers. Soft, poetic, mildly horrifying. And let's not forget the popular beauty paste made from boiled frog fat, camphor, and powdered pearl. Yes, frogs. You'd slather it on at night and wake up with skin smooth as oil and pale as linen. Historians still argue whether this worked or just made you smell like a damp marsh. The knowledge in these books was a blend of ancient Greek medicine, Arabic alchemy, Christian mysticism, and good old-fashioned gossip. One section might cite Galen or Avicenna, the next might reference Saint Hildegard, and the next might simply say, as taught by Lady Maud of Wiltshire. It was a patchwork of centuries and cultures stitched together in ink. Monasteries often had more polished versions, medical books with sections on hygiene and beauty, disguised as preventive health. A monk might not say, here's how to make your face shine, but rather, a tonic to preserve the humors and prevent melancholy. Same difference. And here's your quirky tidbit. In one German text from the 14th century, there's a chapter on how to sweeten the breath of goats, directly followed by a wash to make the cheeks glow before a banquet. The priorities were curious. Now, owning one of these books wasn't illegal, but it could be frowned upon, especially if it veered too close to what the church would call witchery. A woman mixing herbs at night, whispering over boiling pots, copying recipes by moonlight? That could raise eyebrows. So you keep your book tucked away, safe, hidden. It's not just about beauty, it's about power. To know how to make rose water, to soothe your skin after a day in the wind, to blend herbs for a sleep tonic that actually works. In a world where so much is out of your control, these little secrets feel like spells. Your favorite page has a recipe for a salve made from beeswax, olive oil, and rose petals. It claims to heal everything: cracked lips, dry elbows, the spirits of tired women. You make it often, stirring slowly, humming to yourself, feeling like a magician. The smell alone is enough to make your small room feel like a chamber in a manor. And you're not alone. Across Europe, women are doing the same thing, tucking recipes between psalms, hiding them in cooking pots, whispering them to daughters, friends, even lovers. Beauty knowledge travels quietly. It doesn't shout. It simmers. Some books even offered advice on behavioral beauty. Walk with soft steps. Do not frown while spinning. Speak gently and hold your chin aloft. It's like medieval posture training, with a dash of passive-aggressive auntie advice. But these books weren't just for women. Wealthy men might have their own copies, or access to apothecaries who had read them. One French nobleman was known for his obsession with a certain cooling balm said to prevent wrinkles caused by squinting in tournaments. Another supposedly commissioned a recipe for a tonic that made his beard grow in thicker, though it reportedly just made his face itch for 3 weeks. So here you are, seated by the window, turning one last page. It contains a charm, half prayer, half spell, to protect your beauty from envy. Say these words, it says, before entering a crowd, and none shall speak ill of your appearance. You whisper it quietly, smiling. Because tonight, you're not just washing your face. You're participating in a centuries-old ritual of secrecy, softness, and self-care. You tie the book shut with its linen ribbon, place it back in your chest, and tuck your latest mixture, lavender, honey, and powdered almond, onto a shelf to rest overnight. Tomorrow your feet will suffer for beauty, but tonight your skin is soft, your secrets safe, and your dreams perfumed like a rose garden at dusk. The rooster hasn't even thought about crowing when you slip out of bed, tug on your softest woolen stockings, and wince. Your heel is sore again. You rub it gently, trying not to groan too loudly, and reach for your shoes, if you can call them that. They're more like leather suggestions, flat, unstructured, and certainly not designed for comfort. But they're your best pair, and today's the village procession, which means your feet have to look acceptable. Maybe even a little lovely, if you squint. Because believe it or not, in the Middle Ages, foot care was part of the beauty equation. No, people weren't painting toenails or doing cucumber wraps, but smooth heels, dainty steps, and elegant shoes were all markers of taste, and sometimes status. You glance down at your toes, a bit rough. You reach for your pumice stone, really just a scrap of volcanic rock your aunt swore by, and start gently scrubbing. This is your routine: scrape, rinse, pat dry with a slightly cleaner bit of linen, and rub on a bit of goose fat mixed with sage oil. The smell is poultry adjacent, but the softness, worth it. In noble circles, foot care went even further. Some elite ladies hired attendants just to bathe and perfume their feet. Foot baths with rose petals weren't just luxurious. They were considered hygienic and medicinal. A Venetian noblewoman once wrote that she bathed her feet nightly in donkey milk and lavender water to preserve the temper of the skin. Must be nice. And the shoes. Oh, the shoes. They weren't made for walking long distances, let's be clear. Pointed shoes, known as poulaines, became wildly fashionable in the 14th century. Their tips extended several inches beyond the toes, sometimes so far that they had to be tied to the leg with a string. It was like walking around with a pair of leather swords strapped to your feet. The longer the toe, the higher your status. A duke might wear poulaines with tips a full 2 feet long. A miller, maybe an inch if he was feeling spicy. The church didn't love this trend. In fact, several bishops issued angry letters condemning pointy shoes as tools of pride and snakes upon the feet. One even claimed they were designed by the devil to mislead the steps of men. Harsh words for footwear. But the trend persisted. Even some clergymen secretly wore them, trimming the tips just short enough to escape notice, or tripping over them during Mass, depending on their luck. Women's shoes weren't much more practical. Made from soft leather or cloth, they were often dyed in pale shades: white, ivory, faded pink. Beautiful, yes. Mud-resistant? Not even slightly. That's why pattens, wooden overshoes with stilts, became popular in muddy cities like London and Paris. You'd slip them on over your dainty slippers to keep your feet dry and your hem off the ground. Clunky, noisy, and absolutely necessary. Of course, none of this applied to you if you were poor. Most peasants either went barefoot or wore rough leather shoes with thick soles, and zero arch support. The good news? You didn't have to worry about falling over in a puddle. The bad news? Blisters. Lots of them, especially in winter when frostbite was a very real danger. Still, even the poorest villagers tried to keep their feet tidy. nails were trimmed with knives. Cracks were softened with animal fat or mashed plantain leaves. Some rubbed their heels with sheep lanolin or ash paste to prevent drying. And on feast days, you always washed your feet, especially if you hoped someone might be looking. Here's a curious tidbit. In some parts of medieval Germany, there were beauty folk tales about women whose feet smelled like lilies. If a maiden's feet gave off a floral scent, it meant she was chaste, blessed, and destined for noble marriage. You naturally have your doubts. But you do remember your grandmother saying that walking barefoot through mint made your dreams sweeter. Feet were also symbolic. In religious art, washing feet was an act of humility. In love poetry, dainty feet were praised as signs of grace and elegance. One French poet even described his beloved's step as so light she barely troubled the earth. We assume he never saw her on a muddy hillside after rain. In court, ladies were judged not only by their faces or voices, but by how they moved, graceful steps, elegant glides, poised turns. A lady with calloused feet or a clunky stride might be passed over at dances. Posture and poise weren't just for show. They were a subtle, constant performance. And for men, well-kept feet signaled discipline. A knight with cracked heels and fungus-stained toenails was unlikely to earn much admiration, no matter how many dragons he'd hypothetically slain. Some knights traveled with oil-soaked bandages and vinegar rinses to keep their boots fresh and their feet unoffensive. After all, long marches in chainmail didn't exactly allow for spa day. You finish rubbing the last of the balm into your heels and slide on your slippers. They're worn, but with the new ribbon stitched across the top, they look a little more festive. You feel proud. And despite the pebble you'll definitely forget to shake out, you know you'll walk through the market with a little extra confidence today. Beauty may be head to toe, but the toes don't get nearly enough credit. Tomorrow, you'll admire leggings and hose. Tonight, you rest your feet in a basin of mint water and fall asleep dreaming of soft grass and shoes that don't pinch. The morning dew is still thick on the grass, and the first thing you notice as you step outside isn't the smell of smoke or the sound of chickens. It's a flash of bright blue wool tight across a man's calves, disappearing around the bend. You pause, blink, and yes, it's what you thought. Hose. Not garden hose, not pantyhose, medieval hose. And if you're picturing something halfway between leggings and long socks, you're exactly right. Because in the Middle Ages, men didn't just wear hose, they flaunted them. You head toward the market with your basket, only half listening to the juggler by the well, because suddenly you're caught in the quiet, undeniable confidence of a man in well-fitted legwear. His tunic is cropped just high enough to reveal the top seam of his hose, stitched to his brays underneath. And there's even a little decorative stitching running along the outer seam. You can't help it. You look. Because in medieval fashion, a man's legs were the runway. Chests were often covered, arms modestly layered. But legs? Legs were where the real drama happened, especially among the upper classes. Let's break it down. Hose were long, tightly fitted garments that covered the legs and sometimes the feet. They were usually made of wool, stretchy, insulating, easy to dye. And yes, they were often brightly colored, crimson, forest green, deep gold. If you were rich, you might wear 2 differently colored legs as a fashion flex. Picture a dashing noble in one red leg, one black, sauntering through a feast hall like a strutting falcon. Over time, hose became so tight and fashionable that tunics got shorter just to show them off. This sparked an endless cycle of one-upmanship. The shorter the tunic, the more hose was revealed. By the late 14th century, you could see a man's entire thigh on a walk through Paris, and possibly more if his tailor was feeling ambitious. Naturally, the church hated this. A famous sermon from 1390 referred to the shameful garments of men who show the curvature of their flesh to the judgment of angels. That's medieval for, those leggings are too tight, young man. Some cities even attempted to regulate tunic length by law. Historians still argue whether this was about modesty or just older men being annoyed by youth culture. And let's not ignore the codpiece. Ah yes, the codpiece. A flap or pouch attached at the front of the hose, originally for practical purposes, latrine logistics, but eventually evolving into a fashion statement of its own. Some were padded, some were bejeweled, some were downright alarming, but they were undeniably part of the late medieval beauty ideal. Strong legs, tight hose, and let's say, confidence up front. You glance around the market again. A young merchant's apprentice is smoothing his hose before helping a customer. His are striped, two-toned wool, likely his only nice pair. But he knows they matter. Everyone does. Hose make the man. And don't think women didn't notice. Courtly love poetry often praised a man's legs and posture. He stood like a column, one poet wrote. His hose of saffron yellow, tight as virtue. Whether or not saffron yellow was truly virtuous is up for debate. Here's your fringe tidbit. For today, some fashion-forward men stuffed their hose with cotton or wool to make their legs appear more muscular. Yes, leg padding. The medieval version of skipping leg day at the gym. There are even accounts of noblemen being mocked in satire for having the thighs of a goose and the pride of a lion. Ouch. Poorer men wore looser hose, less stretch, more function. But even they paid attention. A clean seam, a well-mended foot. On holy days, they might dye them with walnut husks for a deep brown sheen. One peasant in England reportedly wore red hose to his wedding, a bold move that earned him the nickname Fire Legs for the rest of his life. And don't forget the role of footwear. Hose were usually tucked into ankle boots or tied to leather soles. Fancy men wore poulaines, those absurd pointy shoes you remember from earlier, their toes curling like commas after every step. The right combination of hose and shoes could elongate the leg, emphasize the calf, and suggest nobility even in someone with a questionable lineage and a limp. Meanwhile, tailors were working overtime. Hosea were stitched with more and more precision as the century wore on. Some had decorative panels, embroidered seams, or even tiny pearls sewn along the ankle cuffs. Yes, pearls, on men's socks. Because why not? You pass by a carpenter who's rolled up his tunic to keep cool. His hose are dusty, patched at the knee, but they hug his legs like second skin. He catches you looking and gives a half smile. It's not flirtation exactly, it's recognition. Everyone notices hose. And of course there were critics. Older clerics grumbled. Moralists warned that hose encouraged vanity and impure thoughts. One chronicler accused young men of stalking like peacocks, their hose so tight they creaked at the knees, which frankly sounds kind of fabulous. By midday, you're back home, rubbing your feet, which, unfortunately, do not have the benefit of hose. But you smile as you imagine tomorrow's festival, when the boys will strut in their finest, their hose pressed and stitched, their codpieces, slightly too proud. Because in a world where fashion was fleeting and survival uncertain, even a pair of brightly colored leggings could be an act of beauty, of expression, of rebellion. Tomorrow, you'll learn why tanned skin was a big no-no. Tonight, you drift off imagining legs like columns, hose like ribbons, and the quiet power of a well-dressed calf. You wake with a sunbeam across your face and a strange pang of worry in your chest. Not because of chores or taxes, but because you caught a glimpse of your forearm yesterday and it's tanned, just slightly, barely noticeable. But in the mirror-polished lid of your soup pot, it looked darker than usual. And in the medieval world, that was a problem. Tanned skin didn't mean you'd just returned from a relaxing seaside holiday. It meant you worked outside, under the sun, with your sleeves rolled up, sweat on your brow, and dirt under your fingernails. It meant you were a laborer, a peasant, not refined, not noble, and most certainly not beautiful by the elite standards of the day. Pale skin, on the other hand, that was everything. It said you were sheltered, well-fed, genteel, the kind of person who had servants, not sunburns. It wasn't just fashion, it was class. You walk to the well with your sleeves tugged down despite the heat, trying to protect what little nobility you have left. And as you pass the baker's wife, you catch her doing the same, pulling her hood a bit lower over her cheeks. You exchange a look of quiet camaraderie. She, too, is trying to avoid the kiss of the sun. Throughout medieval Europe, this obsession with pale skin is everywhere. It appears in poems, paintings, letters, and even marriage contracts. A noblewoman described as having milk-white skin is more likely to secure a favorable match than one with a wind-burned face. It's that simple, and that unfair. Cosmetics helped, of course. And the usual suspects: crushed pearls, chalk, vinegar-based lotions, and egg whites to tone and cool the skin. But prevention was the real key. The truly elegant stayed out of the sun. Umbrellas, or parasols, weren't yet common in most regions, but wide-brimmed hats, veils, and hooded cloaks did the trick. Women might wear multiple layers, even in summer, to keep the sun off their arms. Some even applied a mix of clay and milk to exposed skin before heading outdoors, an early, if unpleasant, form of sunblock. And men? Nobility certainly didn't want their sons looking like shepherds. A squire might spend more time tending to his master's horse than riding it, but he'd still be expected to maintain a pale complexion. This led to what some historians jokingly call cloak culture. Young men wearing heavy cloaks in warm weather purely to protect their skin. Fashion before function, always. Now here's a quirky tidbit. In 13th century France, a physician wrote that sun-darkened skin indicated an excess of yellow bile, a humor associated with aggression and poor judgment. Pale skin, meanwhile, was linked to a gentle temperament and clear mind. So yes, your complexion was not just cosmetic, it was characterological. Historians still argue whether this association between skin tone and class was as strictly enforced in rural communities. In cities and courts, definitely. But in small villages, it's likely people were more forgiving. After all, everyone had to go outside eventually. Still, even peasants sometimes covered up on holy days, attempting to approximate the ideal with a little powder and a tightly wrapped headscarf. There's even evidence that some women in Italy and southern Spain, where sun exposure was harder to avoid, used lemon juice or vinegar to bleach their skin. The acidic solution would sting, peel, and reveal paler skin beneath. It wasn't always effective, and sometimes left behind red blotches, but it showed just how far people would go to chase the pale ideal. But don't mistake this for a universal standard. In other parts of the world, during the medieval period, tanned or darker skin didn't carry the same stigma. In many Islamic cultures, for example, olive and bronze tones were admired and even celebrated in poetry. In West Africa, deep skin was associated with beauty and spiritual strength. But here, in this particular corner of Europe, you're judged by your pallor, and this prejudice extended into art. Look closely at medieval paintings and tapestries, and you'll notice the contrast. Nobles rendered pale and luminous, peasants shown ruddy and sunburnt. Even biblical figures were depicted with ivory complexions, an artistic inaccuracy, but one that reinforced the prevailing belief that fairness equaled virtue. It affected everything: fashion, courtship, health rituals. A woman might stay indoors all summer, not out of laziness, but to preserve her complexion. She'd embroider by candlelight, pace the shaded halls, maybe write a love poem about longing for a breeze, but she would not tan. Men teased each other for sunspots. In one 15th century letter, a young lord complains that his rival looked as though he'd been sleeping with pigs in the sun. Harsh words, but the insult lands precisely because of this social bias. So you return home from the well, roll down your sleeves a little further, and check your arms in the looking glass again. It's not too bad. Maybe the clay mask you applied yesterday helped. Maybe the veil is doing its job. Maybe you'll steep some parsley and rose water tonight, dab it on your skin, and sleep in the cellar where it's cooler and darker. Because yes, it's silly. Yes, it's based on rigid, outdated ideals. But here now, in this world of rituals and rules, beauty means looking untouched by labor, by sun, by sweat. Tomorrow, you'll ponder the strange contradiction of religious modesty and romantic allure. Tonight, you sleep with a cloth draped gently across your face, chasing the moon-pale glow of a life lived in shadows. The bells toll softly in the distance, and you rise not to the bustle of market day, but to something quieter, more internal. Today is the feast of a minor saint, which means extra prayers, fasting, and, most importantly, time spent at church. So you light a candle, pull your veil tightly over your head, and prepare yourself for the odd balancing act that medieval people knew all too well, the tension between religious beauty and romantic beauty. You know how to look holy, you've practiced. You keep your eyes lowered when passing men, your sleeves long, your veil carefully arranged so it drapes just below your chin in that perfectly modest way. No rouge today, of course. Just a touch of rose water dabbed behind the ears. Enough to be clean, not enough to be vain. And yet, as you stand in the stone-cool hush of the chapel, your mind drifts. You notice the way the baker's son glances sideways at the girl in the blue wimple, the way she folds her hands, how her face, untouched by cosmetics, but glowing with youth, catches the dappled light from the stained glass window. There's modesty, yes, but also performance, a quiet kind of allure. In medieval Europe, especially between the 12th and 15th centuries, this contradiction ran deep. The church promoted modesty, humility, and chastity. Women were expected to cover their hair, conceal their bodies, and avoid vanity. But literature, art, and courtly tradition painted a very different picture, one of long-haired maidens, sultry glances, and secret exchanges of favors in moonlit gardens. So what gives? Scholars still argue whether this contradiction was hypocrisy or just human nature. Some say it reflects the dual pressures on women: be holy, but also desirable; be a chaste wife and a romantic ideal. Others suggest it wasn't seen as contradictory at all. A woman could be beautiful because she was modest. That tension created an allure all its own. Take the cult of the Virgin Mary, for instance. She was often depicted as the pinnacle of purity and grace, but she was also shown as luminous, glowing, soft-featured, almost impossibly beautiful. She became the template for holy femininity, modest, pale, gentle, not seductive exactly, but certainly compelling. Then contrast her with the ladies of courtly love poetry. Think Guinevere, Isolde, or the heroines of troubadour songs. These women were veiled in layers of symbolism and silk, their beauty described in almost painful detail. Hair like flax, lips like coral, eyes that pierce the heart like a knight's lance. And yet they were still expected to be unattainable. Flirtation, not fulfillment. You, standing in church, feel this tug-of-war quietly in your own life. You don't wear bright dyes. Your dress today is soft gray. But the stitching around the sleeves is careful, delicate. You've tied a single ribbon at your wrist, not garish, but visible, just enough. And that's the thing. In this world, beauty isn't shouted, it's hinted. A demure glance, a clean hem, a perfume so faint you're not even sure it's real. Romantic beauty plays by religious rules. It pretends not to notice it's being noticed. There's even a phrase that appears in love letters from the 14th century. She is beautiful because she does not try. The implication being that effort itself was suspicious. Natural beauty was divine. Manufactured beauty? That was vanity, and possibly a pact with the devil. Which brings us to the sumptuary laws. Those pesky rules set by city councils and kings to control what people could wear. They weren't just about economics. They were moral codes. Certain fabrics, colors, or jewelry were banned from commoners because they risked looking too desirable. A silk veil, a gold thread, even fur linings could make a woman appear above her station, and that was dangerous. But of course, people found ways around it. A linen tunic dyed carefully with walnut husks, embroidery that looked plain until sunlight hit it just right, a belt tied loosely, suggesting a waistline without actually displaying it, modesty with a wink. And here's a curious tidbit. In some convents, nuns were known to compete, subtly in how gracefully they moved, how neatly they arranged their habits, even how well they sang. All outward signs of devotion, yes, but also tiny performances of beauty, sanctified, quiet, coded. Men weren't immune to this contradiction either. A devout monk might wear a rough wool habit and sand his scalp bald, but he could still be admired for his voice, his posture, the clarity of his skin. Knights were praised for holy valor and humble speech, but also for their strong arms and shining eyes. Modest beauty mattered, especially if it looked unintentional. You leave the chapel and walk slowly past the flower garden. The baker's son is there again, picking a sprig of thyme. He nods. You smile, small, contained. Just enough to be polite. Just enough to be remembered. Back home, you wash your hands in rosewater and vinegar, feeling the layers of the day peel away. The modest veil, the silent glances, the balancing act between being seen and being pure. Because in the medieval world, beauty walked a narrow path, between worship and desire, between the candlelit altar and the edge of the dance floor, and you, like so many others, walk it too. Tomorrow, you'll explore battle scars and muscle-bound knighthood. Tonight, you sleep beneath a plain linen sheet, dreaming of a world where modesty glows like moonlight, and beauty is found in the pause between glances. The clang of a blacksmith's hammer echoes down the lane as you stir from sleep, and somewhere in the distance, roosters duel with their morning crows. Today, though, you're not the inking about linens or roses or rouged cheeks. No, today you're thinking about men. Specifically, what made a man beautiful in a world of swords, saints, and suspicious hygiene. You pull your shawl closer and peer through the window. A pair of young squires stride past, their cloaks flapping behind them, boots polished, shoulders square. One of them catches your eye. He's got a bandage around his arm, a souvenir from a training mishap, no doubt. You wonder, will he keep the scar? Would he want to? Because in medieval times, a man's beauty wasn't delicate, it was earned. And often, it was earned on the battlefield. Forget modern six-packs or chiseled jawlines, though let's not pretend those were ignored. What really made a man handsome in the Middle Ages was strength, posture, confidence, and yes, a few well-placed scars didn't hurt. They were proof. You'd seen things, done things, survived things. The kind of man who could take a sword to the chest and still flirt with the candlemaker's daughter. Now let's start with muscle. Not showy, bodybuilder bulk, but functional strength. Arms from archery, legs from marching, hands that looked like they'd chopped wood and pulled reins, and maybe, just maybe, held yours tenderly during a feast day dance. Toned, but not vain. Knights were idealized in literature as paragons of both courage and beauty. Think shining armor, tousled curls, a noble brow furrowed in prayer. But beneath the surface, there was a deeper kind of appeal. The kind forged by discipline, hardship, and scars. Courtly love poems spoke of knights with shoulders broad as gates and gazes deep as winter rivers. A little dramatic? Sure, but also surprisingly effective. Historians still debate whether these descriptions reflected real admiration or were just literary devices. Was the knight as heartthrob a common fantasy or a cultural exaggeration? Hard to say. But we do know that portraits of noblemen often emphasized certain traits: straight posture, defined features, strong hands. Not too soft, not too wild. And let's talk about scars. In many medieval societies, a well-earned battle scar was practically a badge of honor, especially if it was visible on the cheek, the temple, across the forearm. A nobleman who returned from a crusade with a stitched brow wasn't seen as damaged. He was seen as decorated, proof of bravery, proof that he'd faced death and come back better, and possibly slightly broody. There's a famous story about Richard the Lionheart revealing his scars to his troops to boost morale. Whether or not that happened exactly as the ballads claim, the idea stuck. A scarred man was a survivor, and survivors were attractive. That said, not all scars were celebrated. A mark from a lost duel? Respectable. A crooked nose from a tavern brawl? Questionable. The line between rugged and reckless was thin, and often dictated by class. A peasant with a broken tooth might be called unfortunate. A knight with the same could be called grizzled. And speaking of posture, here's a fringe tidbit for your sleepy thoughts. Medieval dancing masters, yes, they existed, trained noble youths to walk and move with grace, back straight, shoulders relaxed, arms controlled. A man's stride could win hearts or lose land. The beauty of bearing mattered just as much as the beauty of face. Think of it as the medieval equivalent of good posture and confidence at a dinner party. Clothing, too, played a role. A well-cut tunic in rich fabric, wool, velvet, or silk for the especially wealthy, could transform an average man into a heartthrob. Hose that hugged the leg just right, a belt slung diagonally across the hips, a cloak draped casually over one shoulder, each detail helped shape the masculine ideal. And don't underestimate hair. Wavy, shoulder-length locks were often considered desirable, especially in romance literature. Not too styled, just naturally tousled enough to suggest you'd been in riding through the forest rescuing someone. Some men perfumed their hair with scented oils or rosemary rinses, particularly before banquets or court appearances. A knight might swing his leg over a horse and leave behind a faint trace of lavender. Intentional? Entirely. But what about the face? Sharp cheekbones and strong brows were praised, but so was a gentle expression. In illuminated manuscripts and devotional art, the most admired men, kings, saints, knights, often had a serene, contemplative look, power balanced by grace, strength softened by piety. A face that said, I could kill a bear, but I also own a prayer book. You walk into the village square and catch sight of another man, older, heavier, with a limp and a cane. Not a knight, clearly, but his eyes are kind, his hands steady, and you remember what your aunt once said, a man's beauty is in how he listens. Because yes, brawn had its place, but character, that was beauty that aged well. Tonight you rub rosemary oil between your fingers, just out of habit. You think of strong arms, soft voices, and scars that speak louder than words. Tomorrow you'll wander into a darker corner of beauty, herbs, charms, and whispered spells. Tonight, you dream of armor glinting in torchlight, a battle-worn smile, and a hand reaching gently for yours. The wind is cool tonight, rustling the trees outside your window and carrying with it the scent of crushed sage and wood smoke. You light a small tallow candle, just enough to see by, and reach for the pouch hanging near your bed. Soft leather, tied with a bit of braided string. Inside are dried herbs, a sliver of wax, and a tiny smooth stone worn from years of handling. You call it your beauty pouch. And though no one would say it aloud, not in front of a priest or a particularly pious grandmother, everyone in your village has something similar. Because in the medieval world, beauty wasn't just a matter of powders and posture. It was also tied up in mystery, in plants, in whispers, in magic. Not capital M magic, mind you. You're no sorceress. But you know what herbs to steep to clear your skin, what roots to chew when your cheeks feel puffy, and which flowers to tuck in your sash if you want to catch someone's eye at the midsummer festival. It's folk knowledge, woman knowledge, half-heard stories, part kitchen, part hedge, part chapel. Let's begin with the herbs. Rosemary to purify, thyme to strengthen the spirit, fennel to sweeten the breath, sage for clarity of voice and skin. These were not just for cooking. They were believed to influence your humors, those invisible currents inside your body that determined everything from health to attractiveness. You grind them into balms, steep them in vinegar, tie them in bundles, and hang them above your bed. One medieval beauty mask recipe you've tried involves mashed cucumber, mint leaves, and goat's milk. It stings just a little, but it leaves your face as cool as marble and smelling faintly of garden. Then there's rue, a slightly bitter herb that, when soaked in wine, was said to chase away blemishes and bad dreams alike. You've used it before. Maybe it worked. Maybe it just felt like it did. That's the thing about medieval beauty herbs. Their power wasn't just in chemistry, it was in belief. And that belief? It walked a fine line. Because the church didn't like these little rituals. Not entirely. Bathing was fine. Smelling pleasant was okay. But using herbs to enhance your face? Or to draw someone's gaze? That got complicated. Quickly. One record from a 14th century English manor mentions a servant dismissed for using a charm to appear more fair at festival. Was she casting spells, or just using a marigold rinse and whispering a rhyme? Hard to say. But the line between folk healing and heresy was often drawn by the nearest suspicious clergyman. Still, people persisted. You've heard your neighbor mutter charms while brushing her hair. By star and stone, let beauty be shown. Her grandmother taught her that. And you know at least 3 women who keep elderflower water in their cellars, both to wash their faces and, if you believe the whispers, to anoint their mirrors on nights of full moons. Here's a fringe tidbit you've never quite confirmed. Some say that a decoction of rose hips and crushed emerald, if drunk on a Tuesday, can make the skin glow for 9 days. No one you know has tried it. Crushed emerald isn't exactly common, but it still makes the rounds at spinning circles, passed along with laughter and raised eyebrows. Even hair care has its magic. A rinse of nettle and honey to bring out shine. A sprig of heather braided into hair for courage and, according to a few older women, for fertility. One bride in your village wore lavender tucked into her veil to keep her face fresh and her temper gentle. Her husband fainted during the vows, but she looked radiant, so maybe it worked. Of course, not every beauty herb was benign. Belladonna, also known as deadly nightshade, was sometimes used to dilate pupils, creating a dreamy, wide-eyed look. Dangerous, risky, but alluring. Some women, it said, even plucked the leaves in secret and added the juice to their morning tonics. Others stayed far away, fearing both poisoning and gossip. And don't get started on mandrake root. Shaped like a tiny, twisted human and rumored to scream when pulled from the ground, it appeared in dozens of grimoires and herbal texts. Some claimed it cured skin blemishes. Others said it attracted suitors. Most just agreed it was unsettling. Still, you keep your own collection safe. Tucked behind the flour sack, in a wooden box lined with linen, you've got dried rose petals, crushed violet root, a scrap of parchment with a charm written in poor Latin, and 3 pebbles, smooth, round, wapayus, armed between your palms before applying creams. Ritual, not magic, mostly. And it's not just about attraction. These rituals are about self-possession, control. In a world where marriages are arranged, crops fail, plagues come uninvited, and death often arrives without knocking, a little spell to keep your cheeks rosy feels like a tiny piece of sovereignty, a rebellion in lavender and wax. You sit by the window, brushing your hair 30 times, not because it's tangled, but because someone told you once that it would make your heart lighter. Maybe it does. Maybe it just makes you sleepy. Tomorrow, you'll peer into paintings and tapestries for beauty cues from frozen saints and painted ladies. Tonight, you tuck a sprig of rosemary beneath your pillow, just in case the old stories were right. It's just after dawn, and the world outside your window is hushed, the kind of stillness that hangs before the village fully wakes. You pull on your cloak and step outside, feet crunching softly on the frosted grass. Today, you're not headed to the market or the church. You're going somewhere quieter, somewhere full of stories frozen in silk, pigment, and thread. You're going to look at beauty through the eyes of art. You make your way to the small chapel near the edge of town, where a new altarpiece was just installed, a painted panel from the city, depicting a host of saints, angels, and the Virgin Mary herself. The paint glows in the candlelight, the figures shine, and more importantly, they're beautiful. But not like the women you know. Not quite. In medieval artwork, beauty is stylized, codified, almost otherworldly. Faces are serene, symmetrical, strangely similar. Skin is pale, glowing like wax or ivory. Eyes are large, often looking slightly heavenward, lips small and rose-colored, never parted. Hair is golden, arranged in soft waves or perfect coils, not a strand out of place. It's less realism, more idealism. Art didn't reflect what people looked like. It reflected what people were supposed to look like. And that standard? It's everywhere. In altarpieces, manuscript illuminations, stained glass, tapestries, even the carvings above the church door. Beauty isn't just admired, it's sacred. You step closer to one painting. A saint with cheeks like peach blossoms, fingers long and pale, neck elongated as if she's already halfway to heaven. She's barefoot, of course. Saints usually are. But even her feet look tidy. This idealized beauty wasn't accidental. Artists followed strict symbolic rules. Pale skin meant purity. Blonde hair meant innocence. Blue robes meant divine grace. A long, swan-like neck suggested nobility. Rosy cheeks and lips indicated spiritual warmth. Not lust, mind you. That would be scandalous. But of course, the lines blurred. There's an undeniable sensuality in some of these figures. Mary Magdalene, for instance, often looks far more glamorous than the average village woman. Her hair loose, her eyes gentle, her hands curved delicately around a jar of ointment. Holy, absolutely, but also captivating. Scholars still argue whether this was intentional. Was medieval religious art quietly smuggling in romantic ideals, or were artists simply using the most beautiful forms they knew to express divine glory? Perhaps both. After all, if beauty was a reflection of God's perfection, then it only made sense to depict holy figures as breathtaking. And it wasn't just women. Knights in tapestries stand tall and broad-shouldered, cloaks billowing behind them like storm clouds. Saints have carefully chiseled jaws and sorrowful eyes. Even angels, genderless in theory, are often rendered with soft features, glowing skin, and perfect curls. Beauty wasn't bound by gender in these works. It was about radiance. Presence. One of your favorite illustrations is in a book of hours kept in the abbey just outside town. On one page, an angel stands beside a noblewoman, pointing upward. The noblewoman's face is delicately drawn, but what catches your eye is her gown, rich green, embroidered with gold thread. Her sleeves fall like waterfall veils from her elbows. And despite the fact that she's kneeling in prayer, she is, unmistakably, the star of the show. You know real women don't look like that. Not exactly, but they want to. You want to sometimes. Art offers a beauty that doesn't sweat, doesn't smudge its veil, doesn't catch lice or get sore feet. It's aspirational, comforting, slightly ridiculous, and yet, there's power in it. Here's a quirky tidbit. In certain medieval art workshops, beauty was so standardized that apprentices had a face chart, a set of ideal noses, brows, and lips they were taught to copy for saints, queens, and maidens alike. It was like the medieval version of an Instagram filter. Everyone was beautiful, in the same way. Even when depicting sinners or villains, artists used appearance to signal morality. A wicked woman might have darker skin, wild hair, or exaggerated features. A pious one? Smooth, bright, symmetrical. It wasn't just aesthetic, it was didactic. Art taught people how to see, what to desire, what to avoid. But that's not to say art ignored reality altogether. Marginalia, the strange, whimsical illustrations scribbled in the borders of manuscripts, sometimes featured real people. Bakers with flowery hands, old women with drooping noses, young lovers tangled awkwardly behind hedges. In those little corners of the page, beauty was messier, more human. One such marginal note shows a woman combing her hair while peering into a fish's reflection. Not glamorous, but oddly endearing and relatable. You've done the same, with a bucket, not a fish. And then, there's tapestry. Woven beauty. These weren't just decorative, they were didactic too. A lady with a unicorn. A knight kneeling before a queen. The color, the folds of the gowns, the dreamy faces, all frozen in thread, saying, This is how love looks. This is what desire wears. You sit for a while longer in the chapel, letting your eyes move from saint to saint. Their stillness begins to seep into you. You start to realize that in these images, beauty isn't about standing out, it's about harmony. Every detail belongs. Every face fits. There's peace in that. And maybe that's why people tried to look like their painted counterparts. Not just to be admired, but to belong. To feel like they, too, were part of something more ordered, more radiant than the muck and chaos of daily life. Tomorrow, you'll look beyond your village, beyond Europe, to beauty in lands and cultures your neighbors never even dream about. Tonight, you close your eyes and imagine yourself stitched into a tapestry, hair softly waving, cheeks glowing gently, forever caught in that moment just before a prayer begins. The fire crackles softly as you sit wrapped in a wool blanket, comb in hand, smoothing your hair out one last time before bed. But your mind isn't on your own reflection tonight. It's far away, past the green hills of your village, past the bustling cities and cold cathedrals of Europe. It's dreaming of beauty beyond your world, medieval beauty from around the globe. Because while your neighbors are fretting over pale skin and polished foreheads, someone across the desert, the mountains, or the ocean is tending to themselves in a way you can hardly imagine. Let's begin to the east. In the Islamic world, especially in cities like Baghdad, Cairo, and Cordoba, the medieval period was a golden age of science, poetry, and yes, cosmetics. While your local healer is grinding rose petals into goat fat, physicians in the Abbasid Caliphate are writing full treatises on skincare. Avicenna himself, one of the most influential thinkers of the era, devotes time to the health of the skin and hair in his canon of medicine. Here, beauty means cleanliness, not just spiritually but physically. Daily bathing is encouraged. Scented oils are part of the routine. Hair is carefully oiled, perfumed, and sometimes dyed with henna to add richness and shine. Kohl, black powder made from antimony, is used around the eyes not only to beautify but also to protect against the sun's glare and prevent infection. A functional flourish. And skin tone? Olive, bronze, golden. These are admired, not hidden. Poets compare beloveds to polished amber and roasted almonds. Pale skin doesn't mean status, it means illness. Meanwhile, in West Africa, particularly in the kingdoms of Mali and Ghana, beauty is bold. Women adorn themselves with beads, cowrie shells, and intricate hairstyles that serve as both style and language, braids that tell stories of clan, age, even mood. Shea butter is used to smooth the skin, give it a luminous sheen, and protect from the sun. Ebony skin, radiant with oil, is considered elegant, strong, deeply desirable. There's a story told of Mansa Musa's wife being carried in a palanquin veiled with gold-threaded cloth, her skin shining like obsidian, her fingers dyed with fragrant henna. She was said to smell of frankincense and cloves, not because she was trying to attract attention, but because that was how queens were supposed to smell. Over in East Asia, during the Song dynasty in China, beauty has its own rituals, delicate, precise, poetic. Skin is powdered white wit, rice flour, not to appear noble, but to enhance a porcelain ideal of clarity and balance. Lips are painted small and red, eyebrows arched like butterfly wings. Hair is twisted into elegant buns and adorned with jade pins or flower combs, sometimes interwoven with silk threads. Scented sachets hang from belts, carrying notes of sandalwood, cassia, and jasmine. Here, beauty is tied to poise. A woman's steps are measured. Her voice soft. Her garments flow like water. Paintings don't celebrate curves or muscle, but grace, harmony, refinement. And let's not forget Japan, where Heian court ladies layer their robes, sometimes up to 12 deep, in coordinated colors representing seasons, poems, even moods. They blacken their teeth with a paste called ohaguro, a symbol of maturity and elegance, and shave their eyebrows, painting on new ones high on the forehead. It might seem odd to your European sensibilities, but in that world, it's the peak of refinement. Historians still debate whether this practice was widely loved or merely endured, but the ideal stood for centuries. Now travel south to the Pacific Islands, where beauty is shaped by sun, sea, and symbolism. In some parts of Polynesia, tattooing is more than art, it's identity. Men and women mark their skin with intricate designs that tell stories of ancestry, courage, love. Hair is left long, sometimes oiled, sometimes adorned with shells or tropical flowers. Skin glows with coconut oil, and strength, stamina, confidence, connection to nature is as vital to beauty as any pigment or powder. In the Americas, pre-Columbian civilizations had their own powerful ideas of beauty. Among the Aztecs, flowers and scents were sacred, gifts to gods and lovers alike. Women wore their hair in braids or buns, sometimes adorned with colored ribbons. Skin treatments used aloe, maize, and honey. Men plucked facial hair and used clay masks to soften the skin before festivals. And again, paleness wasn't praised. What mattered was health, composure, cleanliness, and sometimes mystery. You sit back, warm from the fire, mind spinning with images, so many kinds of beauty, so many textures, scents, rituals. Your powdered cheeks and parsley-toned skin feel suddenly small, but not in a sad way, just part of something vast. Because that's the thing. Every culture had its own lens, its own symbols, its own sacred steps to becoming beautiful. Whether through veils and oil, color and pattern, or silence and poise. And here's your quirky tidbit for the night. Some medieval Islamic perfumes were so prized, they were used as diplomatic gifts between rulers, sealed in ornate glass vials and infused with rare spices from India, Arabia, and beyond. They weren't just scents, they were status, invisible crowns. You wrap your blanket tighter and smile. Tomorrow, you'll turn inward and ask the quiet question: did medieval people even think they were beautiful? Tonight, you drift to sleep surrounded by 1,000 unseen mirrors, some glazed in gold, some carved in stone, some floating in dreams, each reflecting a different idea of what it means to glow. The sky is clouded over tonight, and the flickering lamplight inside your little cottage feels warmer than usual, as if the walls are drawing in to keep you company. You sit beside the hearth, hands folded, and ask yourself a question you've never dared to say aloud. Did people in the Middle Ages even think they were beautiful? It seems obvious now, doesn't it? You've walked through a world of powders, veils, herbs, scar ointments, posture lessons, courtly poems, and flirtatious glances beneath candlelit archways. Beauty was everywhere. But what about self-image? Did a woman look into a polished copper mirror and think, "Yes, I look lovely today"? Did a young knight brush the mud from his cheek, glance at his reflection in a still pond, and feel handsome? The truth is murky. For one, mirrors were rare, and often distorted. Not the clear silvered glass we know today, but hammered metal, uneven and hazy. What you saw was less a reflection, more a hint, a ghost. And yet people used them. Women carried tiny polished discs in pouches. Nobles had wall-mounted versions in their chambers. Even monks, famously austere, sometimes owned a spiritual mirror to reflect upon their sins, though one wonders if they snuck a glance at their beards too. But did they like what they saw? Historians still debate how much medieval people thought about self-image in the way we do. Modern notions of self-esteem and personal validation weren't quite there yet. Beauty was often seen as a virtue or a gift, not something you claimed or sculpted. It was something you were given or not. God had decided. Your task was to either maintain it humbly or accept your lot gracefully. There's a passage from a 14th century French romance where a woman is described as unaware of her loveliness, as a rose is unaware of its scent. That was the ideal, beauty without awareness. To look too long in a mirror, to adjust your gown too often, to crave praise. These things were dangerously close to vanity, and vanity was sin's favorite doorway. And yet, you know better. You've seen the baker's daughter pinning a daisy into her braid before the maypole dance. You've heard the stable boy whistling a little louder as he passed a certain window. You've even caught yourself, once or twice, smoothing your apron when a kind voice called your name. People felt beautiful sometimes, quietly, in fleeting moments. Perhaps not the way we imagine now, with selfies and mantras and lighted mirrors, but in different ways. In feeling clean after a long bath, in receiving a compliment, in wearing your best cloak on a feast day and seeing someone's eyes linger just a moment longer than usual. Here's a quirky little truth. Some medieval prayer books had miniature portraits of the owner, painted with careful idealization. The cheeks always rosier, the hair slightly glossier, the hands more delicate. People saw these versions of themselves, accepted them, maybe even loved them. In one German household manual from the 15th century, there's a section on how a woman should keep her body pleasant and presentable to her husband, but tucked in the margins is a note. It is a joyful thing when one sees one's reflection and smiles. So yes, maybe they did. But it wasn't all joy. There were pressures, expectations, comparisons, just like today. If you were born with fair skin, blue eyes, and gentle features, the world was kinder. If you weren't, there were powders, cloaks, veils, prayers, but not always kindness, even then. Still, beauty wasn't always about the face. A woman could be praised for her noble bearing, a man for the lightness of his step, a child for having hands like folded petals. People found beauty in the way someone sang, the way they sat at table, the warmth of their gaze. These were the things remembered, not cheekbones, not jawlines. Tonight you sit by the fire and feel the warmth rise into your cheeks. You haven't looked in a mirror today. There's soot on your apron. Your hair's in a braid you tied while half asleep. But someone earlier told you your laugh made them happy. And just like that, you feel beautiful. Tomorrow we'll turn to the quietest ritual of all, when beauty meets its end. But tonight, rest knowing that even centuries ago, people wanted to be seen, to be admired, to be held in someone's eyes a little longer than necessary. And sometimes they were. The wind is slow tonight, not whistling, not sighing, just moving gently through the trees like a breath through long-forgotten silk. The hearth glows low behind you, see, pasting a golden halo on the wooden floor. You sit still, hands folded in your lap, and think of one last thing. What happens to beauty at the end? When age settles into your bones, when the flowers fade, when the comb gathers more strands of gray than gold. In the medieval world, as in ours, time came for every face, every figure, every carefully plucked brow. But unlike today, beauty's end wasn't always met with panic. Sometimes it was met with ritual, reflection, even reverence. You rise from your chair and pour a little warm water into a basin, lavender-scented, steeped from dried petals you saved last summer. You wash your face slowly, not to impress anyone, not to prepare for a dance or a saint's feast, but because it's time for rest. A medieval woman, perhaps you, perhaps someone like you, did this too, centuries ago, with similar motions. In many cultures, aging didn't strip a person of beauty, it transformed it. In certain French court poems, an older woman was called sage et douce, wise and gentle. Her hands may have been wrinkled, her voice softer, but she carried the glow of knowledge, of stories remembered. Her beauty was in the hush of her words, the grace of her silence. Among some early Christian writers, true beauty increased with age. Why? Because as vanity faded, the soul's light was believed to shine more clearly through the body. A nun with deep smile lines and tired eyes might be praised for her radiance, not in spite of her age, but because of it. And yet, there was grief too. Women mourned their youth. Men missed the strength of their limbs. One Italian widow in the 14th century wrote, in a letter to her sister, "The mirror holds no memory of who I was." That line still catches you, even now. Historians still argue whether such personal reflections were widespread or rare luxuries of the literate elite. Most common folk didn't write their thoughts. But surely, even the weaver's wife in a village like yours noticed the change in her face, the way her apron fit looser at the waist, the way fewer heads turned when she walked through market. Still, there was tenderness in the passing of beauty, a kind of inheritance. A mother passed on her rosemary rinse to her daughter. A grandmother gave her carved bone comb to a granddaughter. A widow taught her niece the way to tie a veil so it stayed firm in wind but floated just enough to soften the jaw. These weren't lessons in glamour. They were lessons in continuity. You think of the old women you know, stooped, veiled, eyes like polished glass. Some sing softly when they mend cloaks. Some mutter about aching joints and saints with too many feast days. But every once in a while you catch one smiling to herself, and you wonder, what memory just passed through her mind? A dance? A compliment? A moment when the world paused to say, "You are beautiful"? And now, in the hush of this final night, you see beauty not as something bright and loud, but as something accumulated, worn smooth by time, like the handle of a beloved ladle, or the corner of a prayer book touched too often. Because in the end, beauty in the Middle Ages wasn't just about seduction or status. It was about presence, posture, cleanliness, grace, devotion, restraint, and eventually, memory. You slip beneath the covers, linen warm from the fire. Your face is clean. Your hands smell of rosemary. Your eyes are heavy, but your thoughts are full. Tomorrow, someone will light a candle in your honor. They'll remember your soft voice, your steady hands, the way you laughed with your eyes. Maybe they'll say you were lovely. Maybe they'll say you were kind. And maybe, in their dreams, you'll appear exactly as you are tonight, still, calm, and quietly beautiful. Now, everything slows. The fire is down to its last few embers, casting that faint, reddish light that barely reaches the edges of the room. The shadows are gentle now, folding around you like worn velvet. Outside, the wind has settled. The trees are still. Even the animals seem to have gone quiet, as if the whole world has paused, just long enough for you to exhale. You've traveled so far tonight, from perfumed powders to saintly fasting, from courtly mirrors to desert oils, from blushing veils to quiet, wrinkled hands. You've wandered through centuries of rituals, flirtations, doubts, and soft moments of admiration, some whispered, some never spoken at all. And yet after all of it, you're still here, just you, just this breath, this blanket, this silence. There's nothing more to prove, no gaze to win, no cheek to powder, no strand of hair to adjust, just rest. Because beauty doesn't need to be chased in the dark. It's already here, in your slowing breath, your soft pulse, the way your mind gently lets go of each image, one by one. So sleep now. Let the echo of distant bells carry you off. Let the faint scent of lavender linger on your skin. Let your thoughts drift like petals on a still river. You are already enough. You always were.